Olá, seja bem-vindo a este podcast direcionado para as finanças sustentáveis, uma parceria entre o Jornal Económico, o Seega Sustainable Finance Center e a Embaixada Britânica em Lisboa. Ao longo de algumas conversas com nomes relevantes no setor da sustentabilidade e no setor financeiro, tanto britânico como português, pretendemos aqui evidenciar o papel do setor financeiro em conseguir, efetivamente, endereçar as questões de alterações climáticas que nos imperam a agenda da sociedade. O meu nome é João Santos Costa e hoje teremos connosco Nina Seega, Director of the Center of Sustainable Finance do Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, e vamos discutir como é que os temas relacionados com o clima e com os riscos ambientais, digamos, estão a ser integrados nas decisões das instituições financeiras. Eu vou passar esta conversa para inglês para conseguir acomodar a nossa convidada. Nina, thanks for joining us today in this conversation and welcome to Jornal Económico.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Nina, I would begin by asking you, what is the potential impact of climate change on the financial sector, and how do you see financial institutions addressing these risks?
Thanks. I mean, it's quite a substantial one, actually. So if you think about how we define sustainable finance, we look at it as financial institutions addressing environmental source of risk in their portfolios, as financial institutions actually understanding what happens within their operations, as well as how do they finance sustainable development goals. So the impact of climate change goes through all three of those things. There is an impact on the operations, which is the easiest one to calculate and to understand. There are also quite substantial impacts on the risk side. And here we talk quite a bit about climate-related financial risks, which usually translate into physical risks and transition risks. And when you think about the physical, so, very physical impacts that we see of climate change. So, for example, if you have flooding, how does that impact the values of your mortgage portfolios, for example, if you're a bank? Or if you have particular heat stress, how does that change the values of your agricultural portfolios that you might be investing in or lending to? But you also have transition source of risk, and that's our attempts to combat climate change. So particular policies coming in, different technologies that are coming in, as well as shifts in sentiment.
And what about to nature? How could we bring nature into this conversation? Actually, how can we at all measure the carbon and biodiversity benefits of nature-based solutions to ensure that these benefits are accurately reflected in the funding mechanisms being created right now?
Well, so nature is a huge contributing factor. We've started doing quite a lot more work in trying to understand how it interacts with climate, because it works on the one hand together, but also there is materiality of nature-related financial risks above and beyond climate. But if I give you a couple of numbers, if you look at the one of the reports of the UNDP and IUCN, nature-based solution can deliver emission reduction removals of at least 5 gigatons of CO2 equivalent a year by 2030, and potentially doubling that by 2050. And if we assume that actually our temperature stays within the 1.5 degree relatively, and I say relatively safe range because there will
be that's an ambitious goal at this moment.
Number one, it's an ambitious goal, but number two, there will be particular changes to the environment even at 1.5 degrees. So we're not looking at living in the business as usual. The world at 1.5 degrees will look very different. But even if we manage to stay within that 1.5 degree range, nature-based solutions can provide up to 30% of cost-effective climate mitigation by 2030. So we do see quite substantial potential for nature to help us address our climate goals.
And how are the regulators and the central banks throughout the world encouraging or even mandating that financial institutions integrate these risks into the decision-making processes?
So it's slightly varied in terms of different process on the climate side as well as on the nature side. So if you think about climate, we already have financial regulation. We have lots of climate stress tests that are done by different regulators across the world. We have climate coming into supervisory statements, so getting financial institutions within a particular jurisdiction to understand what risks they're running and how those risks are relevant to financial stability. On the nature side, it's a little bit behind, but it's coming up really quickly. So for example, if you think about, there is a voluntary task force for climate-related financial disclosures, which is becoming mandatory in a number of jurisdictions. So we now have legal requirements to disclose our climate.
But why would you say it's a little bit behind?
So nature is coming up. The task force for nature-related financial disclosures will announce its framework in September this year. And from then on, we will see a lot more drive towards disclosures. We already have first legislation in this space. So France has an article that looks at financial institutions already disclosing material nature-related financial risks. But in the majority of organizations, so again, if you think about, there is a huge collaboration of central banks around the world called the Network for Greening the Financial System. Now, they do a lot of work on climate, but also last year, they've started doing work on nature, and they've already started talking about how biodiversity is relevant to financial stability. And once that becomes more embedded, we will see a lot more financial regulators starting to bring nature and biodiversity into their supervisory mandates.
And Nina, what role can these nature-based solutions play when it comes to supporting both climate mitigation and adaptation? I mean, you surely have some examples of successful nature-based solution projects that have achieved these dual benefits. Is that possible?
Well, I'll give you a general one. I don't like name checking particular projects.
Of course.
But I'll give you a general one. So for example, if you think about mangroves, right? So mangroves reduce annual flooding for more than 18 million people globally. And they avoid every year about $82 billion in annual losses from coastal flooding. So actually, this is a huge driver for us to continue restoring mangroves and to think about actually how do we employ nature-based solutions in conjunctions with particular infrastructure solutions, so grey infrastructure solutions, to protect our coastlines.
Do you think businesses will have the knowledge and the capability to comply with the latest requests from regulators and central banks? Surely some hard capabilities are needed, and I imagine some qualified talent is lacking right now.
Oh, we need to do a lot more capacity building in this space. I mean, if you look at the war for green talent that's taking place, it is quite hot. I mean, if you have expertise in sustainable finance, I think there are loads and loads of jobs around to be had. But more seriously, I think the market is bringing up capacity in climate. We are seeing a lot of, in addition to kind of requests on cloud, we're seeing a lot of requests come through on understanding nature, because nature is a lot more complex, and then comparatively, climate looks like a relatively easy thing to do, where at least we know exactly what we need to do. It's just that we haven't quite figured out why we are not doing it yet. Whereas nature, it's a lot more place-based, there are more complex systems to address, and there isn't a single temperature goal currently that we're all directing towards.
Nina, just before we finish, what's the role of the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, and what work has this institution been doing, and what role does education play when it comes to all of this we've been addressing today?
So we are our department within the University of Cambridge, but quite a funky one in the sense. So we do education and research, but we also run what we call leadership groups. And within the Center for Sustainable Finance, we've got 3 groups: ClimateWise, which is our insurance platform; Banking Environment Initiative, where obviously we work with banks; and the Investment Leaders Group, when we work with investment managers and asset owners. And across these, we work with over 60 large financial institutions to drive sustainability into mainstream economic decision-making. Effectively, we do it in two ways. One, via our education programs, which are, we have postgraduate programs, we do quite a bit of executive education. We work with individual organizations, but also we work with these leadership groups together to think through particular research issues or to provide tools for the wider market as a whole, to enable them to better understand and be able to act on both climate, nature, and also social considerations, because people are a huge part of the conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Nina Seega, for your time and expertise and providing us with a very comprehensive overview on the topic of sustainable finance. It was a truly enlightening conversation, and we appreciate the insights and the information you shared with us today.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure speaking to you today.